A writer once penned these words: "The past is behind, learn from it. The future is ahead, prepare for it. The present is here, live it." My name is Dawn Tyler Lee, and I serve as Deputy Chief of Staff of External Affairs in the Office of Mayor Andrew J. Ginther, and it is my honor to shepherd you through today's program. Today we gather to remember the life and celebrate the legacy of a remarkable man, Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr. We gather to celebrate our difference and our commonality. We gather to make a renewed commitment to our community and to one another. We gather to learn from the past, pass the torch to our future while living in the present. Thank you for joining us. We are fortunate in our city that we have elected officials who lead us and personify Dr. King's legacy. We will hear from them next. Mayor Andrew Ginther, the mayor of our great city, Columbus City Council member Priscilla Tyson, and City Attorney Zach Klein will deliver some remarks. Mayor Ginther.
Thank you, Dawn. And, in addition to a few words that I'll share, and from Councilmember Tyson and from City Attorney Klein, I want to recognize our County Treasurer, Cheryl Brooks Sullivan, who's joined us, and the President Pro Tem of Columbus City Council, Michael Stenziano, as well. I'm scanning the room. In addition to the great state representative, Herschel Craig. See, I always pause before I introduce the last person to make sure I'm not missing anybody else. But our great state representative, Herschel Craig, has joined us, and thrilled to have you. He hosted a similar type of recognition just yesterday, I think, at the State House, and we appreciate you making time and being with us here today. I'd love to take credit for this idea of having many different faiths come together to commemorate the greatest peacemaker the world has ever known, but really it goes to Dr. Charles Booth, the pastor of Mount Olivet Baptist Church, who's shared this idea with me some time ago. And as many great ideas come to mayors, they then go to staff who have to actually make them happen. And so to Elon and to Don and the entire team and Grace and everyone that helped organize this in a very short period of time, I'm grateful to them. Because today is not really a day of sadness. We do recognize, we mourn the loss of, in the 50th anniversary of an incredible man. But James Earl Ray had a plan. His plan was driven by hatred, by violence, an attempt to stop progress. When fear and hatred tried to quiet a movement, he failed miserably. Hatred and violence failed miserably. 50 years later, we carry on the work of Dr. King, moving always forward on achieving equitable education for all, fair wages for all, affordable housing for all. We move closer to peace and social justice, at times taking a step backward, but always leaning forward together. It would be a disservice on this 50th anniversary of recognizing Dr. King's work, his commitment, if we didn't rededicate ourselves to the principles and values that he gave his life to. His mission is not yet complete, and our work is now important, now more than ever. Today we remember and mourn a great man whose life was cut too short, taken to us far too young. But most importantly, we must recommit ourselves to a vision of equality, compassion, but most importantly, action. Not any one of us can do everything, but every single one of us, regardless of our age, position in life, education, every one of us can do something. So as we are hearing more today about the values and principles and areas of work and service of Dr. King's life today, from an incredible group of elected officials and faith leaders and community and neighborhood leaders, Ask yourself, what can I do? What is the one thing I can do today to honor this incredible man and this incredible work ahead of us together as a community? Please welcome our colleague, our friend, Columbus City Council member Priscilla Tyson.
Good afternoon, and welcome to Council Chambers. And thank you, Mayor, and for your leadership. Certainly thank you to Pastor Charles Booth for sharing his thoughts for us to be able to have an event like this today. I want to also say to my council colleagues, except for Council Michael Stenziano is in the audience, my council members are having a retreat today. So all of us are not in council chambers, but certainly everyone is committed to the life works of Dr. Martin Luther King. When I think about Dr. King, I'm reminded that our station in life is not determined by our obligation to ourselves, but our commitment to serving others. For me, April the 4th of 1968 began a day of celebration. I woke up excited about my status as a teenager. This was my 13th birthday. I was officially a young lady, and in my mind, this was already a life-changing moment. However, in my excitement, nothing, absolutely nothing, could prepare me for how life-changing this day would be. The news of Dr. King's assassination would not only shake up my day, but it would also change and define me for the rest of my life. I remember that day vividly. I was babysitting my two cousins who lived across the street from me when I heard the news. I remember a feeling of profound sadness, not only for Dr. King's family and friends and everything he stood for, but also I was sad for me. Sad for me. How could this happen on my birthday? Why would someone hurt a man standing up for people who couldn't help themselves in Memphis fighting for sanitation workers? And I've had the opportunity to go to Memphis and meet many of those sanitation workers that were with Dr. Martin Luther King on that day. These were my thoughts my first day as a teenager. Why I could not fully embrace at that time, due to my age, Dr. King's vision of a beloved community, a global vision encouraging people to share their resources to eliminate poverty, hunger, and homelessness. A vision focused on exchanging bigotry, racism, discrimination, human indecency with an all-inclusive spirit of reconciliation and brotherhood. Many of Dr. King's leadership principles and philosophies would later shape who I am and who I've become. I, like he, believe that anyone can be great because every one of us can serve. I also believe that injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. It is hard to believe that 50 years have passed. However, Dr. King's belief in a beloved community is just as important today as it was 50 years ago. So as we observe this milestone, let us remember that our trajectory in life is limited only when our obligation is to serve ourselves. Our true unlimited potential comes when we adjust our vision and begin focus on continuing to serve others. Thank you so very much.
Thank you, Councilmember Tyson. And thank you, Mayor and President Pro Tem Stenziano, for hosting us in council chambers. Good morning to everyone, or good afternoon at this point. I'm Zach Klein. I'm the Columbus City Attorney, and it's my honor to be here today on this 50th anniversary celebration in recognition of Dr. King's assassination. I think it's important as we think about Dr. King's assassination and his death 50 years ago, that we keep that in context of where the world was 50 years ago and where the world is today. Despite the progress made over the past 50 years, I think we all recognize that we still have many challenges to go. Some may say we've made great progress. Some may say we've made little progress. 50 years ago, for example, there was Jim Crow, Vietnam, and suppressing economic policies that promoted poverty, suppressed wages, and rewarded wealth by fueling income inequality. Today, racial tensions and racism remain and rightfully permeate our national discourse, seeking change, both nationally and right here in Columbus. International conflict still exists, whether in the Middle East or the Korean Peninsula, and we're still fighting against economic policies that promote poverty, suppress wages, and reward wealth by fueling income inequality. In 1967, Dr. King gave a speech at a convention in Atlanta entitled, "Where Do We Go From Here?" And in celebrating the anniversary of Dr. King's death, I think this speech in particular provides insightful guidance on how we must never give up on our fight for income, equality, and justice. We must never be satisfied. In this speech, and this will be an appreciation of Pastor Lamar and Pastor Aaron and Reverend King, Dr. King tells the story of Jesus and Nicodemus, and Nicodemus' search to be saved. And after Nicodemus asks Jesus several questions on how to be saved, Jesus gives him this answer, that he must be born again. In other words, as Dr. King analogized when pivoting to America in 1967, your whole structure must change. America must be reborn again. And that's the beauty of America. Really, it's the only place in the world that this can happen, that we can constantly ask ourselves, who do we want to be and how do we get there? Because 50 years ago at this speech, Dr. King challenged the audience to leave the convention with divine dissatisfaction until the problems of 1967 were solved. And it's today that we still need to have that same dissatisfaction until we remedy the problems of today. And our children, 50 years from now, will have to have that same dissatisfaction to remedy the problems that they have 50 years from now. Being dissatisfied brings change, but change is hard. So I want to close by reading Dr. King's conclusion of that same speech, because this ain't easy. But change is necessary if we want to be the community that we desire to be. So Dr. King concludes, "And I must confess, my friends, that the road ahead will not always be smooth. There will still be rocky places of frustration and meandering points of bewilderment. There will be inevitable setbacks here and there. And there will be those moments when the buoyancy of hope will be transformed into the fatigue of despair. Our dreams will sometimes be shattered and our ethereal hopes be blasted. We may again, with tear-drenched eyes, have to stand before the bier of some courageous civil rights worker whose life will be snuffed out by the dastardly acts of bloodthirsty mobs. But difficult and painful as it is, we must walk on in the days ahead with an audacious faith in the future. When our days become dreary with low hovering clouds of despair, and when our nights become darker than 1,000 midnights, let us remember that there is a creative force in this universe working to pull down the gigantic mountains of evil, a power that is able to make a way out of no way and transform dark yesterdays into bright tomorrows." And now someone may recognize this line. "Let us realize that the arc of the moral universe is long, but a bend towards justice." So it's with that backdrop that we can make a difference, that we are the change, to be always dissatisfied to make our community better. I want to bring up Don Tyler Lee again. Thank you.
Thank you very much to Mayor Ginther, Councilmember Tyson, and City Attorney Klein. We are fortunate to live in a city with elected officials like them. Thank you. I would now like to invite Imran Malik, Outreach Director for the Noor Islamic Center, to offer a few words of welcome, and he will be followed by Sabrina Tutstone, who will offer a musical selection. Thank you.
Friends, community leaders, elected officials, Assalamu alaikum. Peace be with you all. We are living in very different times, times where issues of social justice, community advocacy, and civil rights discussions happen very openly because the awareness to these social liberties have become common acceptance and common knowledge. We often at times take these freedoms of free societies for granted, but historically this is not how it was always the case. As there's a lot of stigmatism that can be found in the historical evolution of our societies and communities, with some visible traits that still shadow us and haunt many in our communities. There were many and millions who had sacrificed and bear the strain of time and the backlash of opposing groups to make this freedom a common commodity of our current daily lives. As we all gather here today to commemorate one such great person who has left a mark in the pages of human history, Dr. Martin Luther King. An advocate of civil rights movement, an ambassador of equal rights for all, but not only African-American brothers and sisters, but the minorities that have chosen United States of America as home. A torchbearer of change, a champion of peace, and an anchor of equilibrium coexistence. I can go on, but given the time sensitivity of this event, I'll keep my comments short here. Brothers and sisters, on this occasion, I would like to remind a few quotes from Dr. King's legacy, and I will read out to them. Hopefully, this will refresh our momentum and our vision of collective work together now and in future. Dr. King once said, "The ultimate measure of a man is not where he stands in moments of comfort and convenience, but where he stands at times of challenge and controversy." He also said, "Darkness cannot drive out darkness, only light can do that. Hate cannot drive out hate, only love can do that." He also once said, "Life's most persistent and urgent question is, what are you doing for others?" My fellow brothers and sisters, good men and selfless leaders are appreciated among all faith and cultural traditions. They are the agents and value adds that benefit everyone around them and after them. From Islamic faith traditions, I would like to quote a hadith, a saying of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. He said, "Khairun nasi man yanfa'ul nas," which means the best human being is the one who is most beneficial to others. My fellow brothers and sisters, Dr. King has definitely touched millions during his lifetime, and 50 years after he has left us all, his work, his legacy, his goodwill, and his great dream will continue to benefit all of us globally. His most famous quote, "Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere," reminds us all every day that social justice is a collective and continuous effort. We cannot stay low, but be a continuous agent of positive change and intend to leave the world a far better place compared to how we received it in our inheritance. Thank you to the leadership of City Council, Columbus City Council, and Mayor Andrew Ginter for offering us all this opportunity to be here together and living the model of finding strength in our diversity. These are the very fundamental principles and teachings of my Islamic faith traditions as well. Therefore, on behalf of Noor Islamic Culture Center and the Muslim community of Greater Columbus area, I would like to extend my gratitude and thankfulness to all of you and the leadership of this city. I'm honored and I'm thankful to be standing here amongst you all and commemorating a great leader, Dr. King. Thank you all, and assalamu alaikum.
impressions still are one, drying in the colors of the evening sun. Tomorrow's rain will wash the stains away, but something in our minds will always stay. Perhaps this final act was meant to clench a lifetime's argument. Nothing comes from violence, nothing ever could. For all those born beneath an angry star, lest we forget how fragile we are. On and on, the rain will fall like tears from the stars, like tears from the stars. On and on, the rain will say how fragile we are, how fragile we are. Perhaps this final act was meant to clench a lifetime's argument. Nothing comes from violence, nothing ever could. For all those born beneath an angry star, lest we forget how fragile we are. On and on, the rain will fall like tears from the stars, like tears from the stars. On and on, the rain will say how fragile we are, how fragile we are, how fragile we are. Fragile.
Thank you, Sabrina. As we reflect on our past, we'd like to now turn to the book With Malice Toward None, The Night Dr. Martin Luther King Was Killed. Written by a retired physician, this book is the self-portrait of a young man grappling with the turmoil of the American South during the late 1960s as a medical student in Memphis the night Dr. King was killed. The author, Dr. Peter Rogers, is a Central Ohio resident, and he and his family are here with us today. Please welcome his daughter, Lindsay Rogers, who will share some reflections on her father's behalf.
Hey, my name is Lindsay. Like she said, I am Dr. Peter Rogers' daughter, and it's just an honor, to be up here, period. I feel kind of out of place, but I know my father, the civil rights movement was life-changing for him, and I was just going to read, a couple paragraphs out of this book that he had written, and it says, I was at the hospital in Memphis where Martin Luther King's body was brought after he was shot in April 1968. I was a medical student at the University of Tennessee. His body was wheeled just a few inches in front of me. I remember the shock and sadness I experienced at that moment. Dr. King would never come back. He was permanently lost, and there was no alternative but to accept it. That moment changed my life. I was born and raised in Cleveland, Ohio, and I'd been a sympathetic observer of the civil rights movement, but no longer. I had to become involved. During my involvement, I had my life threatened. I was attacked. I had a gun pointed at me and lost most of my friends, many of whom were in my medical school class and were from the South. I became angry that night, and that was what motivated me to change. I became zealous in my involvement in the civil rights movement and did some dangerous things without thinking. I probably should have been more cautious, but I was young, angry, and I thought I was invincible. On April 4th, 1968, James Earl Ray became a historical villain. But there were other villains in Memphis that came out from underneath their rocks after Dr. King was killed. They smelled blood and wanted to destroy what had been accomplished. These people didn't appreciate the spirit of passion for equality that would meet and ultimately defeat them. This book is just one story of the civil rights movement. History spares no one, and those of us who lived through that night in Memphis when Dr. King was assassinated would surely never remain the same. I didn't. I just thank God that he gave me the opportunity to get to know some very brave people, both black and white. It's because of my experience in Memphis in 1968 and my involvement in the civil rights movement that I believe I have earned the right to say that I have lived. I'll try to get through this without crying, but there's another scene in this book that my dad talks about, and it's a few days after Dr. King was assassinated, and there's a march, and he's taking place in it, and he looks to his left, and there's a tall black man standing there with a long face and sad eyes, and he's holding a sign that says, "I am a man." And he and my father sees a group of white men, spectators on the side, of this march, and they immediately hone in on my dad, and they start, hurling insults and death threats, and my dad was taken aback, and he said he could feel the hate just radiating off of them, and he said, "What did I do? These men don't even know me, And the tall man standing to his left, the one with the long face and the sad eyes, and the one who was holding the sign that said, "I am a man," says, "Now you know how it feels." And my dad went on to say that his life was never the same after that. And the legacy that Dr. King left, his ideas, his beliefs, and his attitudes, they were adopted by my father. And if my siblings were here, they'd tell you those beliefs, that legacy was passed down to all of us and every patient my father ever came into contact with. Quite simply, waiting for change is insufficient. You know what I mean? Preaching about it from a pulpit is just, it's not the answer. Waiting for a miracle, it doesn't work. Injustices have to be confronted, and then the love of God through Christ has to be manifested in practice and action. You know what I mean? And that's something, that was the example my father set for me. And these things, even when it's uncomfortable, even outside of church, even during the week, and that's why we're all sitting here today, because that's the conclusion that Dr. King came to, that waiting for change, it wouldn't end well. Nothing would be accomplished. I feel like I know Dr. King. My father, like I said, he just admires the man so much, and, I felt like Dr. King was almost a member of the family. But he molded my father. Those beliefs, the civil rights movement molded my father into the man that he is today. And these are the people that I look up to, the action takers, right, the sacrificers. They are my examples, and I'm so grateful to God to have them in my life. They set the bar high, but like Dr. King said, until justice flows like water and righteousness like a mighty stream. Thanks.
Thank you, Lindsay, and please join me in celebrating Dr. Rogers and his wife, Emily. Those who have studied Dr. King know his platform had 6 focal areas: education, poverty, better jobs and wages, quality and affordable housing, justice, and peace. Dr. King worked tirelessly to improve the standing of African Americans, females, and other disenfranchised and underrepresented groups. For our commemorative ceremony, we will spend the next few minutes hearing from the present-day faith and community leaders who will share their thoughts about these 6 issues still facing us today. And because Dr. King's work is far from complete, they will ceremonially pass the torch to our young people, empowering them for this next leg of the race. And because Dr. King was a great man of faith, we will begin with Reverend Colin Jones, co-pastor of Advent United Church of Christ, who will talk about that aspect of Dr. King's life. Reverend Jones will be followed by each speaker as they are listed in the program. Let me briefly introduce them. Rhonda Johnson, Director of the Department of Education for the City of Columbus. Rachel Lustig, President and CEO of Catholic Social Services. Angela Williams, President of AFSCME Local 1632. Reverend John Edgar, Executive Director of Community Development for All People and pastor of the United Methodist Church for All People. Christy Angel, President and CEO of the YWCA Columbus. Lama Kathy Wesley, Karma Teksum Choling Tibetan Buddhist Center. Reverend Jones.
To Mayor Ginther, City Council, all those who are responsible for us gathering here today, and to all of you, I greet you. Good afternoon. Let me begin this afternoon, first and foremost, by examining how King identified himself. This is very important because, as we all know, before King was anyone's civil rights leader, he was a preacher. King was clear about his identity, and every time that we speak about him, it needs to be looked at through that particular perspective and lens. It was King who said, "I am first and foremost a minister. I love the church, and I feel that the civil rights is a part of that. I have come to believe more and more in a personal God, not a process, but a person, a creative power with infinite love and one who answers prayers." As a preacher, King identified himself as a representative of God in the struggle. As such, the primary principle that he stood upon, one that guided and undergirded his message, his ministry, and his mission, one that was lived out as the pastor of the Dexter Avenue Baptist Church in Montgomery, Alabama, and later as the pastor of the Ebenezer Baptist Church in Atlanta, Georgia. The principle that was the foundation upon which that he stood upon was that of love. It was King who said, "Hate begets hate. Violence begets violence. Toughness begets an even greater toughness. We must meet the forces of hate with the power of love. But please do not underestimate the power of love in the midst of hate and evil." When King spoke about love, it was not expressed in the form of weakness or passivity. When King spoke about love, it was not in the context of eros or romantic love. It was not about philia or brotherly or sisterly love. No, the kind of love that King spoke about was an all-encompassing kind of love, one that was called agape. Agape is love in action. It is a love that intentionally seeks to preserve and create community. It is a love that seeks to go above and beyond to improve the quality of a life for others, even if that means putting oneself in harm's way. When I think about the life and legacy of Dr. King, his life was one of joy, but constant struggle, strife, and strain, particularly after he concluded his educational pursuits, after he acquired his PhD from Boston University. At the age of 26, for the next 13 years of his life, Dr. King committed himself to the struggle in the South, and that is where he paid the ultimate price with his life. Love was the foundational principle that he stood upon in the midst of the threats. It was because of love that he stood up to fight against the Montgomery, to fight for the Montgomery bus boycott. It was because of love that he stood up against the white power structure time and time again, even though he knew that there would be a jail cell with his name written on it. It was because of love that he challenged the religious leadership in Birmingham while sitting in a jail and informing them that his presence was in Birmingham. Why? Because injustice was there. And that is why he can boldly declare that injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. It was because of love that he and countless others marched onto the halls of Washington, not just to declare that he had a dream, but it was in fact to highlight that the Negro was still not free, and he came to the nation's capital to cash a check. It was because of love that he fought for the Negro in particular, but was inclusive of all humanity as well. Dr. King said, "If you are going to fight, always fight with love, so that when the day comes, when the walls of segregation come tumbling down, and it is completely destroyed in Montgomery, we will be able to live together as their brothers and sisters." And so in conclusion, here's the question that we must wrestle with today. 50 years after his death, how do we move forward in 2018? The greatest way to honor his legacy is not only to laud his accolades and his accomplishments about what he did then. The greatest way to honor his legacy is to embrace the principles that he tried to instill within us and incorporate them in our lives as well. If love is going to be the guiding force moving forward, how do we treat people who are different from us? How do we treat people who we disagree with? How do we treat those people and populations of people who have been pushed to the margins of society? How do we treat racial injustice here in Columbus, Ohio? How do we treat people who have mental health concerns in this community? How do we treat people who are immigrants in this country and in this particular community? How do we treat the LGBT population in this community? How do we treat people with little to no resources in this community? My brothers and sisters, I challenge you on today not to just put a quote of his on Facebook. I challenge you to live as he lived, to love as he loved, to speak up for those who cannot speak for themselves, for the rights of all who are destitute. Speak up and judge fairly. Defend the rights of the poor and the needy. And when you get scared, listen to that inner voice that says, stand up for righteousness, stand up for justice, stand up for truth, and lo, I will be with you even until the end of the world. God bless you. And now I invite Miss Gianna to come forward and light the faith candle. And may the lighting of this candle remind us of Dr. King's own words. Faith is taking the first step, even when you don't see the whole staircase.
We know the lines by heart, like children reading a bedtime story. I have a dream that one day little black boys and black girls will be able to join hands with little white boys and white girls as sisters and brothers. I have a dream today. It is evident that Dr. Martin Luther King valued education. He entered Morehouse College at the age of 15 and thrived in his studies. He went on to earn a master's and a PhD degree. Throughout his teachings, Dr. King consistently asserted that the primary function of education is to serve as a vehicle for advancement and progress, that schools remain the single most historic route to social mobility in this country. In 1964, President Lyndon B. Johnson solicited Dr. King's advice in formulating the legislative agenda known as the War on Poverty. Its cornerstone was the Elementary and Secondary Education Act. This law brought education into the forefront and represented a landmark commitment to equal access to quality education. When Dr. King was presented the John Dewey Award by the United Federation of Teachers for his advocacy and education equity, upon acceptance, he said, "The richest nation on earth has never allocated enough resources to build sufficient schools, to compensate adequately its teachers, and surround them with the prestige their work justifies. We squander funds on highways, on the frenetic pursuit of recreation, and on the overabundance of overkill armament, but we pauperize education." When Dr. King was assassinated, I was a 7th grade student attending a segregated school in Alabama. A year after he was killed, my school was closed, and I was transferred to what we call the white school for a more equitable education. About the same time, my grandmother was facing school desegregation as a teacher. Her school was closed, and she was transferred to a white school. Even though she faced parents who did not want their children to be taught by an African-American teacher, her presence and support were vitally important for the African-American children who attended there. Despite improvements in equitable access to quality education, we still have a long way to go. The White House favors funding border walls, corporate tax breaks, and arming classroom teachers, while they pauperize education. It has been more than 20 years since the DeRoff decision declared that the school funding system in Ohio unconstitutional. It still favors the wealthy districts. And in Columbus, our schools are segregated more than ever by race and socioeconomic status. But today, I'm honored to serve and thankful for a mayor and council who have the courage and vision to be education leaders in this city and to help break the cycle of poverty by supporting high-quality pre-kindergarten. As for the future of education, I am counting on our latest generation of youth, practicing the teachings of Dr. King with nonviolent protests. Little black boys and black girls are joining hands with little white boys and white girls, and they are using their voices and soon their votes to make the world a better place for all of us. I think Dr. King would be proud. Thank you. I invite Najat to come forward and light the education candle. May the lighting of this candle remind us we must pass the torch of education and empathy to our next generation.
On Wednesday, the 50th anniversary of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King's assassination, Jennifer came into our center crying. Jennifer's working 3 jobs to provide for her family. She works at 2 fast food restaurants and cleans a doctor's office in the evenings. Her husband is in jail on a drug-related charge. Thankfully, Jennifer's mom helps her to care for their 2 small children, a 4- and 6-year-old. Jennifer has been holding out for a tax refund that she's been planning to use to buy a new car to replace her unreliable piece of junk that she depends on to get to her work. We sat down with her to help her figure out why the refund hadn't arrived yet. What we learned is that the entire $7,000 has been garnished to pay for an old medical bill. 50 years before, on the night before he was killed, Reverend Dr. King addressed a crowd that had gathered to march on behalf of sanitation workers in Memphis. The march was a part of the Poor People's Campaign to demand better jobs, better homes, better education, better lives. While he knew the threat that was on his life, Reverend Dr. King did not waver in his commitment to the cause and to the people. That night, Reverend King grounded everyone in sacred scripture by reflecting on one of Jesus' greatest parables, that of the Good Samaritan. And he thought about why the priest and the Levite acted as they did. He said, and you know, it's possible that that priest and the Levite looked over at that man on the ground and wondered if the robbers were still there. Or it's possible that they felt that the man was really merely faking, and he was acting like he had been robbed and hurt in order to seize them over there, lure them there for a quick and easy seizure. And so the first question that the Levite asked was, if I stop to help this man, what is going to happen to me? But then the Good Samaritan came by and he reversed the question. And he said, if I do not stop to help this man, what will happen to him? 50 years later, this work is unfinished. The indignity of poverty is still in our midst. In Jennifer's story, we see that the challenges aren't unique to her situation. These are the same challenges over and over again in our work. Why does a parent working 3 jobs still struggle to provide for her family? Why does a medical bill from your past rob you and your children of your future? Why are there children growing up without a parent because we have criminalized a mental health crisis? If we do not stop to help Jennifer, what will happen to her and her children? Today, we recognize that Reverend Dr. King had an incredible capacity to communicate his vision. He conveyed a picture of a community characterized by justice and compassion in a way that everybody could both understand the goal and the sacrifice that it would take to reach it. In addition, Reverend Dr. King had the courage to lead a movement to advance that mission. But it is one thing to recognize contributions, and another to take on that vision and sacrifice as if it is our own. This is when we truly honor Reverend Dr. King. Come, let us together truly honor him. And in that spirit, I invite Tajera to come forward and light the poverty candle. May the lighting of this candle remind us we must pass the torch of compassion to our next generation.
Good afternoon, everyone. For those who don't know me, I am Angela Williams. I am the new elected president of AFSCME Local 1632. I am here today to speak about better jobs and wages. Until his death, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. prioritized the working conditions of African Americans during his trip to Memphis. When he was assassinated, Dr. King was there in support of fair wages and union representation for the ASME Local 1733 sanitation workers. The workers are remembered for the iconic "I am a man" sign to demonstrate that proper wages and treatment were basic human rights. My union brothers stood shoulder to shoulder, fighting for the rights, fighting for human equality, fighting for jobs that could support their family and maintain a roof over their head. This is not asking for much. Treating workers with respect, paying them an honest wages for an honest day work is basic tenets of our democracy. Dr. King knew that my union knows that we are continuing this fight today. We continue in honor of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. We continue in honor of our brothers and sisters, those who are with us and those who we have lost. And we will continue this fight for our future brothers and sisters of this union and others. Today, the labor is characterized as a relevant thing of the past. Some things we no longer need: the right to organize, the right of employees to speak up, the right for better working conditions, a wage they can raise their family and maintain a roof over their head is something we will always need. It is something our nation cannot go without. If employees lose their voice, we will lose one of the strongest cries of equality among men and women and among workers and their families. The right to organize for better jobs and higher wages is critical today, as it was critical during the stormy days during the Memphis strike. It must never be forgotten. It must never be taken for granted. It is a critical voice in our democracy that must never be silenced. In his final mountaintop speech, Dr. King spoke a continuous fight for better jobs and higher wages. He spoke these words to my brothers of ASME 1733. Now we're going to march again, and we've got to march again in order to put the issues where it is supposed to be and force everybody to see that there are 1,300 of God's children here suffering, sometimes going hungry, going through dark and dreary nights, wondering how this thing is going to come out. That the issues that we've got to say to the nation, we know is coming out. For when people get caught up with what is right, they are willing to sacrifice for it. There is no stopping point short than victory. At this time, I would like to invite Nyla to come forward and light the Better Jobs and Wages candle. May this lighting of this candle reminds us we must pass the torch of organization for these things to our next generation.
I am honored to be able to share in this tribute today to the ministry and to the legacy of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Quality, affordable housing, and fair housing practices were key components of the work of Dr. King and the entire civil rights movement. When Dr. King first brought his campaign for racial justice to the North in 1965, he and the other leaders made a decision very intentionally to focus on one primary issue, the issue of housing. And they selected Chicago as the city from which Dr. King would make an appeal to the conscience of our entire nation. Dr. King, in those weeks, months, and for more than a year, highlighted the acute struggles of low-income families to obtain decent housing, not only in Chicago, but throughout this country. And at the same time, he revealed the multiple ways in which racial prejudice and insidious discriminatory practices were harming African American families, preventing them from living where they wanted to, in homes that were safe and affordable. Then Dr. King transformed his powerful rhetoric into a sacrificial act. He moved his own family into an inner-city housing project in Chicago. And housing remained a primary pillar of his clarion call for justice for all people, especially for people of color, right up to his death in Memphis in April of 1968. Furthermore, it is not a coincidence that it was immediately after his death, in honor of his life, that a reluctant United States Congress finally passed the 1968 Fair Housing Act. And that legislation transformed so much of what was so wrong. It did a world of good to begin to stop the worst discriminatory practices in housing. And it continues to be the foundational legislation for the work of so many in this community and around the country today. Well, that was 50 years ago. And now, 50 years later, of course, we're not finished. And so it's humbling for somebody like myself to be among a wide group of people who are committed to the work of providing safe, decent, affordable housing in our community. I look around at this array of nonprofit organizations, folks in the business community, private partner work together where, fortunately, the city of Columbus is almost always at the lead, helping to come up with creative solutions. It's good to see what we're doing, but there's so much that remains to be done. When we look around and just have to acknowledge the de facto racial segregation and polarization in so many Columbus neighborhoods, we know we are not fulfilling the dream of Dr. King. Right now, we are in situations where we find that folks do not live side by side, black and white, and therefore is it any surprise that we find it hard to stand in solidarity, aligned together to ensure that everyone is treated fairly. Right now, there are 54,000 households in Franklin County that cannot afford a decent place to live. This year, last year's statistics suggest it will continue. 71% of all the homeless families in our shelter system are African American, and only 22% of the population in Franklin County is African American. That statistic should haunt us. It is obscene. Black families are 3 times more likely to be homeless in Columbus and Franklin County than their white neighbors. But we can't give up. Instead, we are invited to believe in this legacy. As was mentioned earlier, it's Dr. King who prophesied that the moral arc of history is long, it is very long, but it bends towards justice. And it's up to you and me to do our part. There are things we can do in our individual soul searching. We can decide, where do I want to live, and what are the values that I want my children to have, and not use the excuse of better schools to avoid learning how to live with one another. And there are the things we can only do together, the policy changes, so that we will be the community that has affordable and fair housing practices that benefit everyone. We can do this, but it's up to each of us, and then together we'll make the difference. Thank you for the chance to share. And I now invite Miriam to come forward and to light the housing candle. And may the lighting of this candle remind us to pass on the torch of fair housing to the next generation.
Good afternoon. Dr. King's letter from a Birmingham jail is called one of the most important social justice manifestos of our time. In the letter, written April 16, 1963, Dr. Martin Luther King wrote, "Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. We are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects us all indirectly. Justice. It is something guaranteed to us all by birthright, at least in this country, we think so. However, not all of us have been able to redeem that right. This is the work of the YWCA Columbus, your YWCA, where we stand to eliminate racism and empower women. And we stand for peace, dignity, and justice for all." Dr. Martin Luther King knew this work was important. He knew African Americans across the country knew this as well and knew justice was not given to them. So people began to call and sometimes demand for the right of equality in the eyes of justice. First, through his nonviolent protest, and yes, there were many. The most important one, or the one that we all remember, is Rosa Parks making her stand while sitting in her seat on a bus in Montgomery, Alabama, giving way to one of the most important boycotts that this nation will ever know, gaining national attention for the call of equality and justice. Who can forget that woman sitting in that seat? In his speech following her arrest, Dr. King spoke these words, "And I won't rest. I will face intimidation and everything else, along with these other stalwart fighters for democracy and for citizenship. We don't mind it so long as justice comes out of it. And I've come to see now that as we struggle for our rights, maybe some of them will have to die. But somebody said if a man doesn't have something that he will die for, he isn't fit to live." We lost Dr. King on April 4th, 1968. In a cry for justice, we witnessed violence in multiple cities across our country after his death. We were a nation of people trying to find a place among one another in the wake of this historic loss. We were trying to keep our way. We weren't sure if we could do that. The call for justice has since continued with the words of Dr. King, resounding through us all: brown, black, white, LGBTQ, able-bodied, and disabled-bodied. Even our newest refugees fleeing their home countries in a search for a land with peace and justice are hearing Martin Luther King's words and are inspired by them. Millions have peacefully marched in support of peace, justice, and human rights, continuing on with Dr. King's legacy. Thousands have marched yet just this year for justice. So our work is not done. His vision is still out there, it is alive, and it is still out there for us to achieve, as we still have playing fields to level. Locally, we think about the work of Celebrate One, the effort to reduce infant mortality. We think about the number of African Americans in our family homeless shelters, in our shelters for men and women. We think about the work of the Columbus Women's Commission and our drive to equal pay for women and to reduce the evictions in this community. We think about the work of the city and the comprehensive neighborhood safety strategy, where law enforcement and community can come together to work together, and where the coordination with infrastructure investment to increase safety and develop our neighborhoods into a place that all children can be free to be themselves and grow up to be bright, promising leaders. We know our work is not done when we see thousands and thousands of young people marching for their lives, for their safety in their schools. The task of justice, social justice, and equality and justice is something we must fight for, and must be on our minds at all times. It is the responsibility of people to fight for it, and it is the responsibility of our elected officials to join us in the fight, but also to enact it. Justice does not just happen for us. We cannot just sit on the sidelines. We cannot rest on our laurels or the victories we have won this far, because we have a far way to go. We must continue to act. We must continue to fight, and most important, we must continue the work of Dr. King for social justice. Now, I invite Najib to join me to come forward and light the social justice candle. May the lighting of this candle remind us we must pass the torch of justice to our next generation.
At first, it might seem strange that a Buddhist woman, clergywoman, has been invited to make remarks about a great champion of African American civil rights. But as I believe in the Buddhist principle of interdependence, that all people and all things are interconnected in a profound and powerful way, I think that by looking at Dr. King's life and legacy, we might find the reason why. In our talks thus far today, we've heard about the fight for the rights of housing and the rights to have a good job and so forth and so on, and all of the progress that has been made for this. The word fight has occurred many times. But how do we fight? How do we prepare ourselves for the fight? And this is why I guess that I've been asked to talk a little bit about Dr. King's theories and philosophies of peace, how to create peace and bring peace into the community. Dr. King was not just an activist who succeeded in drawing attention to inequalities in society and bringing positive change. He was a man who made those who labored with him better people, better than they were before. This was, to say the least, unusual. So often, people thrown down by injustice harden their hearts and end up becoming haters themselves by demonizing those they fight against. But through his reading of the words of Jesus Christ and the words of the Indian activist Mahatma Gandhi and the Vietnamese Buddhist monk Thich Nhat Hanh, for whom he nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize, Dr. King infused his labors with the power of what Gandhi called ahimsa, or nonviolence. As was quoted earlier, hatred does not cease by hatred at any time, Gandhi wrote. Hatred only ceases by love. This is an unalterable law. Dr. King said this quotation moved him to the core. Christ furnished the Spirit, said Dr. King, but Gandhi showed me how it worked. With this simple understanding that hatred and violence only begets more hatred and violence, and that for justice to flow, it has to flow out of love and mutual understanding, Dr. King made everyone who worked with him into a better person, into a soldier for peace in their own lives. He taught them that to master a cause, they first had to master themselves. This is why Dr. King encouraged his followers not to return blow for blow. And you know this from the story of his life. When his life was endangered, he begged his followers not to retaliate. He told them to stand firm in holding respect for themselves, for their cause, and even for their enemies. He taught a spirit of righteousness that flows from that single source of love. Dr. King did this. He made people better by teaching the principle of interdependence, that all people are connected by their shared humanity, and that all people equally want safety, justice, freedom, and love. He said that what hurts one person hurts us all, and what helps one person helps us all. He taught us to lift people up, not push them down. Even now, Dr. King is urging us not to just listen to his words, but act upon them, to look below the surface of our opponent's hatred. Look below the surface of our opponent's hatred aimed at us and see that hater's inner pain. And being willing to see that inner pain and perhaps reach out, approaching that pain, acknowledging and maybe even healing that pain is what we, as part of the human family, are called to do. The path of peace is not an easy one. The poverty mentality so prevalent in our world today says there aren't enough resources to go around, and if one person wins, another person has to lose. But if we can try to live as Dr. King lived, making all the people around us better people, by just treating them according to his golden rule, this could be a very different world. If we can do as Dr. King suggests and see the humanity in every person, see ourselves in the eyes of others, this is the source of peace in our hearts and in our lives. And this is how I can stand before you as I am, and with a feeling of solidarity, conclude with this powerful parting instruction that is a paraphrase of Dr. King's own words. None are free until all are free. Now, I would like to invite Tamira to come forward and light the candle of peace. May the lighting of this candle remind us that we must pass the torch of peace to our next generation.
Please join me in thanking all of our speakers and our young people and their adult helpers. I'm mindful of our time, and we want to make sure that we can move expeditiously through the remainder of our program so you can carry on with your afternoon. I will make some very brief acknowledgments, and then I will invite our call to action and our benediction, and I'll ask that Sabrina Tutstone bless us with another musical selection as we are enjoying one another at the conclusion of the program. We were able to partner with Shadowbox to get some discounted tickets to a performance that they have now called Dream. I had the opportunity to see it a couple of weeks ago, and it's amazing. So if you registered for this event through our email system, we will send you an email with information about how to access those discount tickets. If you did not register through our email system, please see Grace Hunter following the program and leave your email with her, and we'll make sure you get that. We thank Shadowbox for their generosity and hope you'll be able to take advantage of that performance. We'd like to thank Dr. Charles Booth, even in his absence, and Mayor Ginther, who had to step out for another commitment, for their vision for today's program. All of our program participants, our youth leaders, City of Columbus staff, in particular the Department of Neighborhoods, CTV, our facilities team, and a special expression of gratitude to Elon Sims and Grace Hunter, who led the planning and execution of today's program. I would also like to recognize two very special guests who are with us today, relatives of Dr. and Mrs. King, who call Ohio their home, Reverend Joel King and, Gregory Foster. I apologize. Thank you. Like many of you, I have been inspired by activism we've seen most recently from young people around our city and our nation. They are demanding change. They are demanding a better America. They are demanding action. In the final words from Dr. King, I've been to the mountaintop the night before he was assassinated in his untimely death. He spoke these words: "Let us rise up tonight with a greater readiness. Let us stand with a greater determination. And let us move on in these powerful days, these days of challenge, to make America what it ought to be. We have an opportunity to make America, and may I add, Columbus, better." And now I will invite Reverend Aaron to leave us with our call to action. To remember is good, but to act is even better. Reverend Aaron is the pastor of Friendship Baptist Church, and then we will receive our benediction from Pastor Lamar, the pastor of Family Missionary Baptist Church, President Baptist Pastors Conference of Columbus and Vicinity. And then as we are adjourning, Sabrina Tutstone will lead us in our final musical selection. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. made a statement that says, "Our lives begin to die when we become silent about those things that matter." I say to this body gathered together, don't let the dream die, keep the dream alive. Someone may ask, how do I keep the dream alive? What can I do? I'm glad that you asked the question because I'm happy to give you the answer. We keep the dream alive by getting involved. By tackling the issues that plague our community. Here are some ways, some things that we can do to get involved in our community. Poverty and addressing basic needs. We can deliver Meals on Wheels to those in our community and better engage with elderly community members. We can donate gently worn suits to organizations such as Dress for Success or My Brother's Closet at the Columbus Urban League. Better jobs and quality housing, build a house for someone through Habitat for Humanity. Engage with the Columbus Women's Commission as they address wage inequality, evictions, and housing. Group involvement and community engagement, get involved with your place of worship that is actively addressing community concerns through the outreach and service. Quality education, adopt a school for the upcoming year and find organizations with similar programs. Attend at least one school board meeting. Finally, social justice and peace. Attend at least one Columbus City Council meeting. Discuss ways to promote peace among races. Again, I say, don't let the dream die, but get involved with those things that bring life to our community. Thank you so much.
God bless you. With all that Dr. Aaron has said, Dr. King said the urgency of now. Now I say unto one, I say unto all, may the God of peace, that brought again from the dead, that great shepherd of the sheep, make you perfect, working in you that which is well-pleasing in his sight. Be glory in the church both now and forever. Let us all say, amen. God bless you.